it's not true that there hasn't ever been an agreement. In fact, there was an agreement that basically did stand a chance of surviving. The North Koreans cheated, and so did the United States by not delivering on their promises. There was a lot of bad blood. Remember, on the eve of the Clinton administration leaving, he was actually meant to go to Pyongyang and did not, because George W. Bush won the election and Al Gore did not follow up. So there was a missed opportunity there. I just want to say that historically. In terms of military solutions, there are none. There really are no good military solutions, which is why Trump's rhetoric has been pushed back so vociferously over time by the international community, the region, including his allies, as well as people within his inner circle. The diplomatic push that's coming up is going to be very interesting. Breaking news in the last sort of 3 or 4 hours. Buried in all these comments was Secretary of State Tillerson, who said the United States, in partnership with Canada, will convene a meeting of the United Nations command-sending states. You know what that is? That's the alliance in the Korean War. And the reason it looks like they're doing this is because it creates a diplomatic grouping that's outside of the United Nations Security Council, does not involve Moscow or Beijing, but does involve all their allies in the region and the Western powers. This seems to be a new diplomatic track with Washington saying, we're not getting anywhere with the UN. We're not getting anywhere with our allies. Beijing and I see this differently. They may be going a different approach, and that is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know what happened the last time we had that group of nations together in Korea? China attacked North Korea. We got in a war with China for 2.5 years.
Absolutely.
I don't think anybody wants that to happen again. The military options are pretty much non-existent. There's a temptation, hey, what if we nuked North Korea? The fallout would be catastrophic. It would go everywhere in that region. Nobody wants it. Nobody thinks it's even conceivable, and you can't do it with conventional weapons. So what do you do?
So, David, it looks like if there's going to be any kind of diplomatic initiative, there's just 2 ways it could go. Either the world persuades the DPRK to reverse its nuclear programs, scrap all its weapons that it has right now, or it accepts the DPRK as a member of the nuclear club.
And I sort of feel that fundamentally the latter may be inevitable. I mean, you're kind of asking to put a lid on scientific progress, and if they don't achieve it in the next year, then are we going to say that 10 years from now, 50 years from now, they won't achieve this potential? I fear it has to be accepted. The other, fundamental issue in all of this is that these are extraordinary times where you not only have Kim Jong-un, but Donald Trump, who I believe his most recent tweet about North Korea was along the lines of, just because he called me old doesn't mean I'm going to call him short and fat. I mean, this is utterly bizarre, and no wonder we're all on edge. It's not like
but in fairness, what policies worked? In fairness, we've had 3 decades of every conceivable approach short of military intervention. I understand that things that might appear off the beaten path might appear odd to an onlooker, but I guarantee you the president's being presented with very sophisticated intelligence about the psychological workings of the North Korean leader, and it's important to explore new options. I think we all look at this and say this really is a horrifying situation. Additionally, not mentioned is the fact that there was, they refueled the ICBM today horizontally, which conceals its ability to see it through satellite systems and from the sky. It's further concerning, so and obviously the other metrics that my colleagues mentioned were totally on target. The arc was impressive. The distance was impressive. It flew further than the 2 launches over the summer. So it is deeply concerning, and you only can see this really ending a few different ways. And it's very difficult to look at diplomatic settlement and say, well, yeah, North Korea is now going to awaken to that.
Right.
But that is obviously Nathan, that is the best outcome, and the one that would be most optimistic. Right. The downside, of course, just final point, the downside of even Pyongyang developing a nuclear capability is that will not be the end of the nuclearization of the Pacific Rim in Asia. I mean, it's, I think, inevitably then going to lead to South Korea and Japan developing their own indigenous nuclear capabilities. And I don't think that many people are going to be critical of them doing that if that does happen.
Nathan, talking about what policies
we don't want
have
to see
worked,
that.
wasn't there some progress with the six-party talks?
Well, I mean, there was a communique, a declaration that basically laid out the parameters in which a deal would be signed, a sort of roadmap, if you like. It was pretty vague. But the thing that the elephant in the room here is that why is Pyongyang developing its nuclear deterrent? It's not because Kim Jong-un or his father or his grandfather was mad, as the US media says. It's because they think it's in their strategic interest. And why is it in their strategic interest? Because they are surrounded by people who do not like them. They do not have security guarantees from the end of the Korean War. It's an armistice, not a peace. And all these things were meant to be coming out of the six-party talks. You were going to have security guarantees for the DPRK in return for a denuclearization. At the time, it wasn't even a nuclear state, to stop testing, and that slowly you reduce tensions. On the current path, what we're seeing is essentially an arms race in Asia, where you have a deployment of missile defense in South Korea. The Japanese want Aegis-based land systems to be able to take out missiles that are fired over its territory. They have both threatened to go nuclear if the nuclear umbrella doesn't work with the US. So the real answer is not more war, it's jaw. I mean, it literally has to be diplomacy. And the Chinese have a plan on the table, as you know, freeze for freeze, if you please, as the, you know, and that has been firmly rejected by Washington. So it's very, very interesting. There is a way out, but it's going to require a lot of commitments.
Right, so I'm wondering, why can't that happen again? Why can't there be some kind of promise, some kind of non-aggression pact, backed perhaps by a United Nations Security Council resolution, saying that North Korea, the DPRK, will not be attacked?
Well, it's all conceivable. I don't think anybody would believe it. I think deep down, Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather before them, they know that the United States and all the neighboring countries want them gone. They want regime change. I mean, they don't
look at
want...
Libya, look at, you know.
Yeah, and so they're like, oh, do I want to be like Gaddafi? Do I want to be like Mubarak or anybody else?
Nuclear, predominantly because of the nuclear ambitions. I think if the nuclear ambitions didn't exist, they're obviously very, I mean, it's got to be the worst human rights conditions in the planet right now.
But the US track record of regime change is not that good.
We would change that.
But you give them up. If you look at the Iran nuclear agreement, does that not leave Pyongyang saying, you know, why should we trust any further offers of deals? You know, why should we take the Americans' word for it?
That puts a big
as soon as they
question
have an
mark over
election,
that,
they're going to
Or the invasion of Iraq, or the toppling of Gaddafi, or
David, what does this mean for the
Ukraine
region? Because there has been something of a response from South Korea. They fired missiles into the water, and as James Mattis said, this shows us that there's going to be some kind of response. That's one thing. Japan, they've held a emergency cabinet meeting, but what does it mean for the region?
I think China is key to all of this, and I think it means the world is looking to Beijing to turn the economic screws. Without China and trade and oil and so on, North Korea is really struggling. But Japan and South Korea, their options are very limited. I mean, as your guest mentions, in the longer term, there is the potential for a nuclear arms race. But in the meantime, they're under the American umbrella, really, depending on Washington to deliver some kind of solution. And in the meantime, it's a very anxious and unsatisfactory situation of sitting put. If you're in Japan, sort of watching missiles drop nearby, and sort of feeling that your hands are tied.
Going to be a tough neighborhood then. Nathan, talking about a role for China, there was that proposal which China came up with months ago, by the foreign minister, who said that China's proposal is that it persuade the DPRK to stop its nuclear testing, but the United States would have to stop its joint military exercises with South Korea. And the United States said, well, we can't do that. This is a treaty ally. That's not going to be happening.
Yeah, the freeze to freeze, and we went into that before, and there was actually some discussion in Washington and the Pentagon about perhaps moving the exercises to Alaska, for example. You don't have to do them on the Korean Peninsula. You can wargame elsewhere. But it was felt in Washington that that would be a signal to allies already worried about U.S. commitments to its allies around the world that wasn't the case. Even if Seoul, for example, went along with it, it may send a signal to other allies, especially Japan. So there is that. There is also a feeling in the Trump administration among certain economic and foreign policy advisors who are not pro-Beijing, that they're being played by China, that they are being played on the North Korean issue, and that China will never fully abandon the DPRK for its own strategic reasons, but also for reasons of the past. If you put an oil embargo on someone, remember what happened with Japan in 1941. They tend to lash out a little bit. So there is this feeling going forward, so that perhaps China has played the US. The big problem is that you're going to need China. So there needs to be some sort of commitment. And, you know, China has indicated it's willing to work with the US so long as it commits to certain things. They're called the 3 no's. No US troops north of the 38th parallel, no regime change, no collapse of the North Korean state as well. If the US commits to that, then they can maybe have discussions. But Beijing is worried that any discussions about a post-Kim Jong-un or a post-nuclear Korea could be a signal for some sort of accommodation or regime change. So the trust is not high.
All right, Michael, what kind of sentiment is there in the US administration, the Trump administration right now, for some kind of serious cooperation, getting together with Beijing, with China, to look at this problem?
I think, you know, from the very beginning, and certainly from the head of state meeting in Florida, that there's been an absolute commitment to that, and there has been some progress. The vote in the UN, where China joined the United States in these deep sanctions, was, I think, a product of diplomatic progress with China. And it's also, I think, in fairness, not all diplomacy. It's, I think, a growing recognition in Beijing that this threat is now not 3 or 5 years off. It's potentially 3 or 5 months off, and that's inevitably going to change your perspective on things if you're sitting in Beijing's position, because I do not believe that they want a nuclearized North Korea. On the other hand, you know, they do continue to trade with North Korea. They've opposed the oil embargo. They've opposed other measures. For instance, it would, you know, allow us to intervene against North Korean seacraft and whatnot. There's a number of steps that haven't been taken, and one of the reasons I think there was skepticism about China originally is that the trade with North Korea over the last decade has expanded exponentially. Now it's coming back down, but those numbers were very discouraging. It didn't show that they were exerting the level of diplomatic pressure that I think was conventionally sort of understood and expected. But I do believe that they're committed to it now. This has got to be concerning if you're there in China right now, and I feel that hopefully it'll, you know, bring Washington and Beijing closer in trying to find a solution to this. Hopefully a diplomatic one.
All right, we have a few minutes left.
I don't see any of those 3 positions.
Yeah.
I don't see any of those 3 positions that Simon mentioned that are deal breakers for this administration. I don't think there's any intention to move beyond the 38th parallel or to change regimes. The military testing would be ending our military.
Talk, and they've been no action, and now it's even worse. Now it's not even talk.
I just think it's very regrettable that our Democratic colleagues in leadership chose to not participate, because we have to negotiate these bills to get this work done.
And I've been in this position under a couple of previous presidents. I can't recall ever turning down an opportunity to go down to the White House.
More on all that as the tax battle progress also comes in tonight. But in the middle of this hugely important and busy legislative day today, North Korea got everyone's attention. They launched their 3rd intercontinental ballistic missile. It was airborne for some 50 minutes. The mood in that room that you just saw from the Secretary of Defense, who spoke next, was resolute but sobering.
North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. It went higher, frankly, than any previous shots they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles that could threaten everywhere in the world.
General Mattis at the White House. Trace Gallagher now in our West Coast newsroom, who explains this story, the trajectory, and what happened today. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Martha. The Intercontinental Ballistic Missile was fired from just outside Pyongyang and landed in the Sea of Japan, 600 miles away. The missile also landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone, meaning it violated United Nations resolutions, put ships in danger, and infuriated the Japanese Prime Minister. But aside from that, this story is not about distance, it's about trajectory. South Korean intelligence says the ICBM flew 2,800 miles up in space. That is 10 times higher than the International Space Station. It flew for 50 minutes, and experts say if it was fired on a normal flatline trajectory, it could have traveled nearly 8,000 miles, hitting anywhere on the mainland U.S. The question now is whether North Korea also has the technology to attach a nuclear warhead to a missile and allow it to survive re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. South Korea says the North does not yet have a heat shield able to protect a warhead. Earlier this month, during his trip to Asia, President Trump warned North Korea, quote, not to try us. And today he said this. Watch.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it.
Now, for the first time since the Cold War, Hawaii is resuming monthly testing of its nuclear warning sirens. Beginning this Friday, the sirens will sound for 60 seconds for more than 400 locations across the islands. The decision to restart the sirens was made before today's ICBM launch, but North Korea has always been the motivating factor. Watch.
It's not stopping. It's in our face. It's an elephant in the room. So when people say that we shouldn't prepare for this, it's not true. We should prepare for this. Unlikely, emphasize that, unlikely for many, many, many reasons, but we should be prepared.
Finally, we want to show you dramatic new video of what happened when a North Korean soldier defected to South Korea earlier this month. It shows the soldier speeding across the border in a Jeep, getting out, being shot 5 times, and then being dragged to safety by South Korean soldiers. South Koreans are now using a loudspeaker with messages about the defector to taunt North Koreans. Martha.
Fascinating story. He was gravely wounded and has survived. Trace, thank you very much. So here now, Mark Thiessen, an American Enterprise Institute scholar and Fox News contributor. He recently wrote that President Trump should declare North Korea a ballistic no-fly zone, meaning that any attempt by the rogue regime will be met by a military strike. So will that happen? Also joining us, Harry Kazianis, the Director of Defense Studies for the Center for National Interest, and Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, a CIA-trained intel operative and senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. So, gentlemen, thank you. Great to have all of you with us tonight. Let me go straight across the line here and start with you, Mark. You believe that the president should respond to this militarily?
Sure. Well, I mean, here as Trace just reported, the North Koreans now have a missile that could reach Washington, D.C. potentially. So this is getting real right now. If they are able to put a miniaturized nuclear warhead on that, then they have the capability of holding Americans, every American citizen, their own nuclear hostage. So we have to decide as a country, are we okay with Kim Jong-un being able to hold all of our children hostages to nuclear blackmail? And if we're not okay with that, then we have to figure out something to do about it. My proposal is simply that the President of the United States should stop the North's nuclear and ballistic missile testing by declaring that henceforth, the United States is going to enforce a ballistic missile no-fly zone over North Korea and a nuclear no-test zone, and that any time the North Koreans attempt to launch a ballistic missile, we're going to take it out. We might take it out with our missile defenses. We might take it out on the ground. If they try to take a nuclear test, we're going to take it out. And he should give them assurances that it'll be a limited strike, just like his strike in Syria was when the North Syrians violated the Obama red line and used chemical weapons. He just took out the base, but he didn't overthrow them. And give them that assurance that if they don't retaliate, that'll be it. But we can stop their testing, and I doubt that they would respond.
Harry, you think that's a big mistake?
Martha, I think that's a huge mistake, and let me tell you why. I think it's an innovative approach. I give Mark a lot of credit, and I read a lot of his stuff, and I agree with a lot of him on many things, but not this. Reason being is, let me pose a scenario. Let's say the North Koreans decide, for whatever reason, to test a nuclear weapon, and they test the weapon, it goes off, and then we fire a Tomahawk missile into that testing range. We know what can happen. That testing range could implode, and we could end up having radioactive fallout going through Seoul or Tokyo. We're talking about 25 25 million people in Seoul, another 35 million in Tokyo. So you know what I'd advocate? Let's keep the Trump approach going on North Korea. Let's continue containment, let's ratchet the sanctions up, and let's push North Korea to economic collapse. But let's not start opening up what could be the ultimate beehive. You know, I just don't think that's the right way to go in this scenario.
Well, you know, it's pretty clear, and General Mattis touched on this in terms of the research and development that we're witnessing from North Korea, Tony, that they want to be able to have a thermonuclear warhead that could reach the United States. And once they have that, really nobody's going to be able to bother them in any way. So that's clearly their goal, right?
Right. Well, good. Yeah, no, I agree. Now, I don't agree with both of you completely, but let me tell you kind of why I don't. First, the ballistic missile technology that they need is already there. I don't buy what Trey said about them not having reentry. Look, it's a ceramic, for God's sake. Ceramics aren't that difficult, so I think we have to assume that they can mount something to a rocket. With that said, I disagree that hitting one of these in orbit is going to cause all sorts of radioactive fallout. It's going to be minimal, especially when you consider reentry. But we're not there yet technically. So what Mark's saying may have merit, but we can't do it. We've got to make sure that if we decide to go down that path, we have to do something called brilliant pebbles, which I've talked to a number of members of Congress about, both Democrat and Republican. And by the way, Hawaii is not simply preparing, doing response drills. They're actually putting more things in place. I don't want to get into great detail, but there are things being done to protect Hawaii and our coast. But we've got to be very clear on this. If we decide to take a policy like Mark is saying, we have to be able to back it up. There has to be a clear and concise penalty that we can enforce. So I don't believe it will be as catastrophic, but then again, I don't think we can do it at this point. So we're left with working with the Trump policy.
All right, so hold on. So the president just got back from Asia not that long ago, and sort of the takeaway was that this envoy was being sent to North Korea from China. They said they had already planned to do that, but anyway, that was sort of one of the boxes that was checked. So I'm guessing, based on what we saw today, that the envoy did not do too well in North Korea, Mark.
That's exactly right. I mean, this was a finger in the eye to both Beijing and to the United States, because just almost as soon as the door hit this guy in the rear end on the way out of North Korea, they've launched a ballistic missile. So what's clear here is that diplomacy is not going to work. So we need some sort of coercion to get them to do it. I agree with Colonel Schaefer that our ballistic missile technology isn't where it ought to be, because for the last 3 decades, the Democrats have been busy gutting ballistic missile defense. Any Democrat who's upset about North Korea should be looking at themselves.
Okay. Harry.
You know, Martha, I think
I'm just saying that you don't have to hit it in the air. You can take out a site on the ground.
Well, you know what? I want to take the long view here. No matter what policy you want, whether you want a military option, whether you want containment, know this: the North Koreans are going to continue to test missiles, and come February, when we have the Olympics in South Korea, 60 miles from the North Korean border, we need to really have our game prepared, because this is only going to get worse.
All right, quick thought from Tony to close.
Well, look, nothing happened while the president was in the Pacific. I think that tells me that they're taking his presence and our position very seriously. This didn't happen while he was there. The North Koreans did this when the Chinese left to poke them in the eye. That's the key. We need to leverage China in such a way to make them accountable, because we're here not only because of the bad policy of the past 2 White Houses not developing nuclear counter technology, but because the North Koreans have been allowed to do this by the Chinese. I would argue, Martha, we got to go after the Chinese and threaten their most favored nation trade status as something that they must be afraid that will enforce. And
all good ideas
they didn't do it.
To be on the table. Thank you very much.
Breaking news: North Korea with a record-breaking missile launch that potentially puts Washington, D.C. in range. Kim Jong-un launching a missile late today, one that Defense Secretary Mattis says went higher than ever before. The Intercontinental Ballistic Missile traveled about 620 miles, airborne nearly an hour before landing in the Sea of Japan. And tonight, President Trump responding, saying the United States will, quote, take care of North Korea.
As you probably have heard, and some of you have reported, a missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. We have General Mattis in the room with us, and we've had a long discussion on it. It is a situation that we will handle.
We will handle. Well, Will Ripley has been inside North Korea 17 times, knows that regime better than any other reporter. He's out front in Seoul tonight. And Will, just moments ago, another warning from North Korea, an official telling you that another nuclear test could be coming, even after the one we just saw hours ago.
That's right, because what we saw was this missile launch, this demonstration to the Trump administration by North Korea that they have in their arsenal a missile that could effectively, and you heard the defense secretary say this, reach anywhere in the world, including anywhere in the mainland United States, New York, Washington, Chicago. But what this North Korean official reiterated to me, something that he told me also back in October, is that North Korea still feels they have more to prove here, and what they need to prove is by conducting an above-ground nuclear test. It would be their 7th nuclear test. North Korea's foreign minister has made this threat. A senior diplomat in Pyongyang told me that threat should be taken literally when I interviewed him just about a month ago. And then this official once again saying today that North Korea is not done demonstrating to the United States what their capability is. Also saying they have no interest in diplomacy until they have proven that they've rounded off their nuclear program, in their words, Aaron.
All right, so it sounds like no interest in diplomacy until they have proven they can strike U.S. mainland cities. I mean, that would be the clear message there. Will, I mean, the timing of this test, the one that we just saw of this missile that would possibly be able to strike Washington, D.C., was unusual because of the time of day, right? This happened a couple hours ago in the middle of the night.
That's right. They rolled this missile out around 3 a.m. local time. There was almost no advance warning. As far as we know, the only indication that a missile launch might be coming was some radio chatter detected by the Japanese within the last few days. So this is North Korea showing the United States that they can launch an intercontinental ballistic missile with very little notice, which obviously is very troubling. If the U.S. were going to try to do some sort of a preemptive strike, they simply wouldn't have time to do that if a missile already fueled up was rolled out and launched. Also noteworthy that this has happened just after North Korea was placed back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, but I would say that this probably has less to do with that and more to do with other strategic reasons for this regime. They didn't launch the missile when President Trump was in Asia. They didn't launch the missile during ongoing joint naval drills. They like the element of surprise, the maximum impact here, and they like to do these things when the world is least expecting them to do them.
Well, Ripley, thank you very much. Obviously, a dire warning tonight. Let's go straight to the State Department now. Michelle Kaczynski joins me. Michelle, experts saying this could be, and this is a pretty significant thing to say given the ramp up in testing we have seen, this could be the most powerful missile yet from North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one more step incrementally towards them reaching their goal of being a nuclear state. We see them with each launch over the past several months change something or advance some of the technology moving forward. So even though when there's a pause in these launches, like we've seen here for 2.5 months, that gives the administration sometimes some cause for optimism, saying that they haven't done anything in a little while, that sanctions appear to be working. Then we see something like this. So what we're hearing is that this one flew higher and farther than others in the past, leading U.S. officials to believe that now they do have the capability with these ICBMs to hit, as Secretary of Defense Mattis put it, anywhere in the world. So obviously that does include the mainland U.S. and where we sit right now. So we heard those words from President Trump and Secretary Mattis. What we heard from the State Department just after is still talking about diplomacy. I mean, I think that might indicate the immediate way forward for the U.S. response, talking about still pressuring other countries to put additional pressure on North Korea, and ending the State Department's statement by saying they're still committed to looking for a peaceful path forward to solving this problem.
All right. Thank you very much, Michelle Kaczynski from the State Department tonight. And now, author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, Gordon Chang, and Spider Marks, retired U.S. Army Major General. Gordon, let me start with you. Look, you hear this layout from Will and Michelle. Higher, farther, most powerful in terms of the missiles we have seen from North Korea. Flying in the air for more than 50 minutes, no advance warning. How close are we to the day when North Korea has the ability to strike the United States mainland with a missile?
Well, I think they probably can do that now. But if you're talking about a missile with proven capability, which they feel is reliable, probably 9 months from now. But we're talking a pretty short time frame because the North Koreans have been able to make much better progress than anyone thought. This missile flew for 53 minutes, at least 6 minutes longer than the one they tested on July 28th. As Will Ripley said, they did this at night, giving us very little warning. And so, we have got to assume that within half year, 9 months, they'll be able to destroy the American city of their choice. And because of the state of American missile defense, there's very little we could do to stop a missile in the air.
I mean, that's a pretty terrifying analysis.
Well, I need to tell you, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gordon.
No. Sorry, General.
Go ahead, General. Go ahead.
Now, Aaron, my view is that what we've seen is, look, there are really three elements at play here. Number one is distance of the missiles. Number two is accuracy of the missiles. And number three is the ability to re-enter into the atmosphere without falling apart or burning up. Yeah. What we've seen, at least what we've seen to date, is a level of accuracy to go 3,000 miles in the air and 600 miles toward Japan and then land within the exclusive economic zone of Japan is quite significant. And that's skinning the cat pretty closely. Were it to be any closer, more toward the territorial waters, that would be an act of war, which would in fact would have some repercussions to the north.
I mean, is what you're saying, General, that they are showing they do have the ability for very specific aim?
I have to tell you that the intelligence community several months ago indicated that, look, the nuclear capabilities that the North had demonstrated were far ahead of schedule than the intelligence community had estimated. Missile development is far more advanced than the intelligence community had estimated. So I think, to Gordon's point, we have to assume now that the miniaturization of nukes and the ability to marry the nuke on top of a missile should be proportionally advanced. If we miss those two, we've probably missed this, and we have to assume they've got a capability right now. And so any future missile launch, we have to assume is nuclear tipped and could strike the United States.
And Gordon, and one that we may not know before it's coming. Because as they just showed, they could do this in the night and no one even knew. So you wouldn't even know that it was on its way.
No, we would.
Yes. You know, the mobile missiles that North Korea has tested have rode to the test sites on the backs of Chinese launchers. And the United States has yet to take that into account. China has made North Korea a real threat. Because we're not worried about North Korea's longest range missile, the Taepodong 2, because that takes weeks to transport, assemble, fuel, and test. We can destroy it with nothing more sophisticated than an F-16. But when you've got mobile missiles, they can do all sorts of things, and we cannot, with any degree of assurance, kill them on the ground.
Spider, let me ask you, the president today, his response, okay, when he first heard about this, the breaking news, said the United States would handle it, right? Those are the words he used, take care of North Korea. This is language, frankly, you know, it was reminiscent to me of what we've heard him said before. We looked, and indeed he has. Here is President Trump going back to February.
North Korea, we'll take care of it, folks. We're going to take care of it all. North Korea is a problem. The problem will be taken care of. We'll handle North Korea. We're going to be able to handle it. It will be handled. We handle everything. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. It is a situation that we will handle.
February 16th is the first time he said that, General, and I see you sort of smiling, but obviously in that time we have had 23 missiles fired from North Korea. But where's the what is he handling? Where's the handling?
Yeah, exactly. The issue is the level that the North has been able to achieve in their development is quite astounding, and we've been witness to that. So, at the end of the day, the United States, in cooperation with South Korea, can handle the challenge, but it's going to. We have increasingly decreased. We've decreased the number of options that we have available. We are right now talking about a military option almost exclusively to, quote, handle the problem. Were we to continue to impose economic sanctions and really throw a blanket over North Korea that was punishing, and the Chinese agreed to that, that would be a timeline of 6, 7, 8 months. Gordon's already laid out for you the inevitability of a capability that's going to exist within that amount of time. Yeah. So economic solutions, diplomatic solutions can be put in place, but they are not going to be sufficiently aggressive in a truncated amount of time for the United States to, quote, take care of it. What we're doing is we're monitoring it, we're watching it, we're developing our anti-missile capabilities, our terminal high altitude air defense capabilities are very aggressive and quite good, and we can monitor these shots. We can see them when they launch at night, Aaron. We've got the capabilities, intelligence, both signals intelligence and imagery intelligence to track this. But this can be done, but we've narrowed the options in terms of handling it.
And the question, of course, General, is whether our missile defense